A girl waiting for the bus was given a ride by a stranger and escaped death by a hair's breadth. Don't forget to subscribe to the Stories of Life's Acts channel. And before we continue this story, let us know where you are from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe as we release videos every day at 12:30 p.m. Early in the morning in Brooklyn, New York, the air was still cool, even though spring had begun to creep through the streets. The weak light filtered through the tall buildings, casting a faint glow on the crowded, bustling roads. Sarah, a 20-year-old girl, stood quietly at the bus stop near Prospect Park. Her long brown hair was gently blown by the wind, and her skin showed signs of fatigue after a sleepless night. She had been cramming for an important exam, with the pressure of studies weighing heavily on her, leaving her unable to catch a wink of sleep. The scene around her seemed like any other day, with cars rushing by, pedestrians hurrying along, and the sound of honking horns echoing in the air. Sarah scrolled through her phone, checking the time. She knew she had an important interview in the afternoon, but at that moment, time seemed to stand still. There was nothing she could do but wait for the bus. She sighed, gazing into the distance as a bus hurried past without stopping at the stop. A momentary sense of disappointment flashed across Sarah's mind. Things didn't seem to be looking up. She began to feel like time was passing by aimlessly. The cars around her sped by, as if they did not care who was standing on the sidewalk waiting. It seemed that everyone here was too busy with their own lives. The feeling of loneliness and exhaustion from the night before suddenly surged within Sarah. She felt lost in the hustle and bustle of this city, where everyone seemed to have their own goals, while she was not even sure if she could accomplish what she was aiming for. At that moment, a shiny black car slowly pulled up next to her. She turned and was surprised to see the window of the car roll down, revealing a middle-aged man, around 40, with brown hair streaked with gray, wearing black sunglasses, smiling at her. "Hey, you need a ride?" "The buses are always running late around here," he said, his deep voice warm and somewhat friendly. Sarah instinctively took a step back, feeling a bit of doubt. She looked into the car, where the man was alone. His gaze seemed polite, but there was something not entirely familiar about him. She glanced around. Passers-by hurried on, but no one stopped. The bus stop was still quiet. She had heard warnings about hitching rides with strangers, but at this moment, her exhausted mind and the thought of waiting for the bus longer made her uncomfortable. Sarah thought maybe just a short ride could save her some time. In truth, she had no idea how much longer she would be waiting for a bus while her interview was approaching. Finally, an impulsive decision was made. She took a deep breath and said to the man, "Sure, thanks," she replied, trying to keep her tone natural, though her heart was filled with some anxiety. The man opened the car door for her, and Sarah stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click. As the car began to move, Sarah felt a shift in the atmosphere. This didn't feel like the bus ride she was used to, where she was surrounded by people who made her feel safe. In this car, it was just her and the man. The air in the car started to feel tense, though the driver kept his calm demeanor. Sarah took a deep breath, trying not to overthink it. She sat quietly, staring out the window. The familiar streets gradually shifted into a less populated area. The wide streets of Brooklyn were replaced by more sparse areas, with trees growing thick along the roads. Sarah didn't recognize this place. It wasn't an area she usually passed through. "Where are you headed?" Sarah asked, trying to break the heavy silence in the car. The man responded in a calm, almost unchanged voice, "Just a little detour, almost there." That answer made Sarah feel something was wrong. A strange sensation rose in her chest, as if something wasn't quite right. Detour? Why was he choosing a different route instead of the main road to where she wanted to go? The feeling of unease began to invade Sarah's mind. She looked out the window, but the streets were becoming emptier, with no one around. The light from the street lamps grew dimmer, and the tall buildings disappeared. Only desolate fields and unfamiliar small roads remained. She couldn't bring herself to look at the man's face anymore. Her fear was growing stronger. Soon after, the car turned into a narrow road where there were no streetlights, only darkness and the shadows of trees. This was clearly not an area she knew, and the longer it went on, the more she felt she could not stand it any longer. At that moment, a clear and powerful decision formed in Sarah's mind. She had to get out of there immediately. The car continued down the quiet streets, and the strange feeling grew more and more distinct. Sarah felt as though she were drifting into a world completely different from the bustling, lively neighborhoods of Brooklyn. Everything was changing too quickly. The tall buildings had long disappeared, replaced by barren plots of land with overgrown trees lining the roads. It was then that Sarah realized she wasn't just passing through quiet neighborhoods. She had likely left the heart of the city far behind. She looked out the window at the narrow roads, the old houses that appeared abandoned for a long time, which only added to her unease. From the closed doors to the weathered walls covered in moss, everything seemed to be silently watching her journey. The world outside the car felt as if it had sunk into an eerie silence, with only the sound of the car's engine breaking it, making the stillness even heavier. Everything seemed to be closing in, making the air grow more tense. But the man driving remained silent, offering no words other than brief responses. She continued to try to stay calm. The fear in her heart had never been so strong, but she could not afford to panic. She kept telling herself that she needed to remain calm, observe, and understand the situation before acting. After a while, the car turned onto an even smaller road, so quiet that Sarah could hear the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel. A chill began to creep over her body. She wondered, how had she ended up here on such a remote road? The space outside the car seemed to grow more unfamiliar, and Sarah felt like she was entering a desolate area with no one around except the two of them in the car. The long shadows of the trees on the road formed strange shapes, making her feel as though she were being watched. This feeling made her sense that she was in a place that didn't belong to her. Sarah began to pay more attention to the driver, trying to read something from him. The man didn't seem to be in a hurry, but his silence was unsettling. Occasionally, he glanced at the rearview mirror, but he did not exchange a word with her beyond the earlier small talk. It was an unnerving silence that made the atmosphere in the car even more tense. A wave of worry rose in Sarah. What if this man had bad intentions? She knew she had to do something to protect herself. This feeling of unease was not just a gut instinct. It was a reality she could feel creeping in more with each passing moment. She quickly glanced at her phone, but as if cursed, there was no signal. She couldn't contact anyone, couldn't check her location. She felt isolated, trapped inside the car. The air inside the vehicle seemed to slow down, and she started to feel suffocated. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching out, making her anxiety grow. Where are we going exactly? Sarah couldn't hold back any longer. She blurted out the question, her eyes still watching the man through the rearview mirror. She wanted an explanation, something to reassure her that she still had control over the situation. The driver responded slowly, his tone still calm, with no hint of urgency. "We are almost there, just a little further." He looked back at the road without saying anything else. At this point, Sarah could not help but doubt what he was saying. She glanced out the car window and saw no one, just abandoned houses and dense trees, making the atmosphere even heavier. She couldn't believe she was heading into such an unfamiliar area. Was he leading her somewhere unsafe? The more she thought, the more she felt a sense of dread and fear. She looked at the door handle, her anxiety rising. If she didn't act soon, things could become dangerous. She looked down at her hands, cold sweat clenching them tightly, and thought about the decisions she needed to make. In that moment, the car turned onto an even smaller road where there were no streetlights. The houses here had become old, desolate, and there was almost no sign of life. The tension reached a boiling point. The air seemed to suffocate, and Sarah felt fear completely take over her, making it harder and harder to breathe. "Please stop the car. I need to get off now," Sarah was forced to speak. Her voice trembled, but she could not suppress the panic consuming her mind. She knew that if she did not do something right now, it might be too late. The man didn't answer, remaining silent, but his eyes reflected an eerie light in the rearview mirror. Sarah looked into his eyes and sensed an unexplainable coldness. Suddenly, she felt a strong suspicion. Could he have bad intentions? But before she could think further, the man looked at her again and spoke in a cold tone. "We are almost there. You will be fine." From his voice and attitude, Sarah knew she had made a serious mistake. The warning signs in her heart had now turned into real fear. She had no more time to think. She had to get out of there. In an instant, Sarah realized she could no longer hesitate. She couldn't remain silent in this car any longer, despite the driver's calm demeanor. A sense of danger was engulfing her, and even in such a tense situation, her anxiety was uncontrollable. The air inside the car had become thick, suffocating, and Sarah felt like she was trapped in a snare. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Unconsciously, her gaze drifted to the window. Long shadows of trees stretched across the narrow road, darkness enveloping everything. She didn't recognize the area, couldn't find any sign of safety. Abandoned houses seemed to be watching her, and everything felt like it was turning against her, as if something was plotting. "Please stop the car. I need to get off right now," Sarah spoke, trying to keep her voice steady. She couldn't allow herself to drift into that feeling of fear, but her mind was beginning to unravel. Every second felt like a century, and she knew that if she did not act right now, she would not get another chance. The man showed no signs of worry. He just glanced in the rearview mirror, smiling faintly, a cold smile Sarah had never seen before. "I told you, just a little further. We are almost there," he said in an unnervingly calm tone. In that moment, everything became clear as a warning sign. Sarah felt it. She knew if she kept going like this, there would be no turning back. This was the moment to act. Sarah stopped thinking. She glanced at the door handle, her hands sweaty but determined. This was her only chance. Her heart raced, feeling like it would burst out of her chest. She couldn't allow herself to stay in this man's hands for even another second. As the car turned onto an even smaller road, Sarah knew she did not have much time left. The abandoned houses around her, the lack of streetlights, and no sign of life, all of it made her feel more and more uneasy. The man remained silent, but his eyes flickered toward her with a mocking look in the rearview mirror. With sudden determination, Sarah quickly turned to open the car door. She didn't even look at the driver, just felt her hand touch the door handle. Her fingers were cold, but her resolve was strong enough to keep her in control. Before the door was fully open, the driver reacted. "What do you think you are doing?" he growled, but Sarah ignored him. In an instant, she shoved the door open and jumped out, not looking back. The car continued speeding, but that did not allow Sarah to calm down. She felt like she was falling down a hill without brakes. Dizziness and nausea from the sudden jump took over, but there was no time to think. She couldn't stop, couldn't hesitate. She had to run, had to get out of this area as quickly as possible. Everything in her mind felt blurry. She could only hear her heartbeat pounding, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silent space. A faint light from a house far away glimmered in the night, but it was not enough to bring her any peace. She ran toward it, her steps hurried, not looking back. Sarah could hear the engine of the car chasing her, getting closer and closer, like a predator that would never give up. She couldn't let herself be caught again. She pushed herself harder, but her legs were beginning to tire. Her eyes blurred from the anxiety, but she could not stop. Suddenly, when she was nearly exhausted, a blinding light shone in her face. Another car, a taxi, was coming toward her, and without thinking, Sarah raised her hand and waved. The taxi stopped immediately, and Sarah had no time to think further. She jumped inside, collapsing into the back seat, gasping for breath, unable to say anything but one sentence. "Please, just go." Fast. The taxi driver looked at her through the rearview mirror, not asking any questions, simply nodding and stepping on the gas. The car sped away like a spaceship. Sarah looked out the window one more time, sighing with relief. But when she turned back, the black car was still nowhere to be seen, although Sarah could not be certain. Because inside her, an inexplicable feeling remained. She had escaped, but had it all ended? As each moment passed in the taxi, Sarah slowly regained her composure, but the tension still had not left her. One big question lingered in her mind. Who was that driver, really? Why had he taken her to such a desolate area? The taxi rushed through the quiet streets, but Sarah still could not shake off the feeling of anxiety that haunted her. Her hands were still trembling, and even though she was safe in the car, her mind could not calm down. Everything was far from over. She couldn't just forget what had just happened. The unease lingered in her mind, like a fragment of a nightmare that had not fully faded away. Sarah sat in silence, saying nothing, occasionally glancing out the window. The night was pitch black, with streetlights flickering on and off, and the tall buildings of the city gradually disappearing into the distance. She didn't know where the taxi was taking her, but at least for now, she felt much safer than she had in that black car. After a moment of silence, the taxi driver, a middle-aged man with a rather ordinary appearance, broke the silence with a simple question. "Are you okay, miss?" Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze in the rearview mirror. His eyes were filled with concern, but there was a sincerity to them. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "Yeah, I think so," she answered, her voice a little hoarse, trying not to reveal the tremor in her tone. The driver nodded slightly, then fell silent again as he continued driving. But Sarah could feel the care in his eyes. There was no curiosity, no excessive questioning, just a gentle understanding and concern. She felt a bit reassured, but the panic from earlier still had not completely left her. Eventually, when the taxi stopped in front of a tall building near a bustling neighborhood, the driver looked at Sarah through the rearview mirror and spoke again. "We are here, miss. Is this your place?" Sarah looked out the window, recognizing the area as one close to where she lived. She felt a wave of relief seeing the familiar streets she had walked every day. She nodded, preparing to get out. "Thank you," she said, expressing her gratitude to the driver. He smiled. "I am just glad you are safe." Sarah stepped out of the taxi, the bright streetlights washing over her, and a wave of exhaustion suddenly overcame her. She walked toward her building, but questions continued to echo in her mind. Why had that driver taken her to such a desolate area? And who was chasing her in that black car? She opened the building's door and walked upstairs to her apartment. When she closed the door behind her, she felt a small sense of safety, but her mind still could not stop spinning with everything that had happened. She decided not to let herself be consumed by fear any longer. She needed to know the truth. She couldn't live in this state of doubt and fear. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of this worry. Sarah sat at the desk, opened her computer, and started searching for information. She wasn't sure where to start, but something urged her to do it. In a moment, a name appeared in her mind, the driver of the black car. Maybe he was just an ordinary driver, but the strange feeling he gave her, that cold look, could not be that simple. She began searching for information about the area she had just passed through, but all she found were old articles and unclear news reports. By chance, a strange website appeared on her screen. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to open it, but a bold headline caught her attention. Strangers in the city dash the story of mysterious kidnappings. She glanced quickly and then decided to open the link. The article described kidnappings with no clear motive, where victims were taken to desolate areas and then threatened or disappeared. What made Sarah's blood run cold was how closely the article's description matched what she had just experienced. We can never predict who is behind these kidnappings, but they always find ways to approach victims with strange cars, inviting them into what seem like ordinary situations. She kept reading, her heart racing as she discovered a chilling detail. Some of these kidnappings were linked to a secret organization, people who carried out unpredictable activities. Sarah realized that she wasn't just an accidental victim dash, she may have been dragged into a dangerous game that she hadn't even known about. The questions in her mind now rang louder. Who was behind this? Why had she been chosen? And was she still safe? She couldn't sit still any longer. She had to dig deeper. She decided she couldn't stay silent in the face of this truth. And more than that, She felt that something bigger was waiting for her dash, something she had never anticipated. Everything was starting to unfold, and Sarah knew she couldn't turn back. She had stepped into a journey where no one could predict the outcome. But one thing she was certain of, this journey had only just begun. Sarah sat silently in front of her computer screen, her mind spinning with the information she had just uncovered. Though it was late at night, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was a much greater danger lurking somewhere. She couldn't continue living in uncertainty. She couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that still clung to her. Everything was too clear now. The mysterious kidnappings, the appearance of the black car, and the strange attitude of the driver. A whisper in her mind urged her on relentlessly. She had to uncover the truth. She reopened the article she had just read, trying to analyze every detail. These kidnappings weren't random coincidences. They were part of a much larger plot, a network that Sarah hadn't known existed. Every word in the article felt like a chilling warning. Strangers, vague names, secret organizations hiding in the shadows of the city. The driver's cold eyes still haunted her, like a piece of a puzzle she hadn't yet figured out. However, what disturbed Sarah the most was the detail about the previous victims. Some had never returned, and those who had survived were left with mental scars that could never be erased. She didn't want to be a part of that story, but now she couldn't sit idly by and do nothing. She decided to dig deeper. Courage surged within her, stronger than any fear. She began following the breadcrumbs in the article, searching through forums, old documents shared by people. She couldn't believe that in this city, things she had never noticed could be so real. A secret criminal network, an underground world with people who were utterly unpredictable. Suddenly, a notification flashed on the screen, causing her to jump. It was a strange email, with no subject line, only a short sentence in the body. "You can't escape." Sarah felt her blood run cold. She tried to remain calm, but the message weighed heavily on her. How could they know she was investigating them? She quickly scrolled through all the open windows on her computer, but found no suspicious traces. She took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. They were watching her. The cold shiver down her spine made it impossible for her to stay still. She knew she had to act, but what could she do? She couldn't take on a secret criminal network like this alone. She needed help. Immediately, Sarah thought of one person. Luke. He was the only friend she could trust right now. A longtime friend she knew would never refuse to help when needed. They had been through a lot together, and she knew he would help her. But how could she contact him without being tracked? She couldn't let them find out she had started investigating. In a hurry, Sarah opened the messaging app on her phone and quickly typed a message to Luke, trying to leave no trace. "Luke, I am in trouble. Need your help. Call me back when you get this." She sighed, worried that the message might be monitored, but she had no other choice. She set the phone down and stared at the computer screen, trying to process what she knew. Everything changed when her phone suddenly rang. Sarah quickly picked it up, and a low voice came through the line. "What have you done, Sarah?" The question froze her. This wasn't Luke. The voice was familiar, but she could not place it. She could hear the sound of an engine in the background and other noises, as if the person was outside. A cold wave of realization washed over Sarah. This was beyond her control. Who are you?" Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but she knew she could not fool this person. "You already know who I am," the voice lowered, dripping with authority. "You can't escape us. You will never be allowed to leave this game." A surge of fear flooded Sarah, but she refused to show weakness. She couldn't afford to break down now. She forced the words out, each one heavier than the last. "I do not understand." "What do you want from me?" "We want what you have, Sarah," the voice replied, emotionless. "And you have already gone too far. You can't stop now." A soft, chilling laugh echoed through the phone, making her skin crawl. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. This was part of a larger organization, something she could not even begin to imagine. Sarah couldn't let herself be trapped in this conversation. She quickly hung up the phone, urgently removed the SIM card and the battery, hoping that at least they would not be able to track her through her phone anymore. She stared at the phone in her hand, feeling like every line of communication had been severed. Now, she had only one choice. She had to uncover everything about this organization, learn who they really were, and what their goal was. But that wouldn't be easy. The anxiety crept back, but this time, Sarah felt she had no other choice. She couldn't stay still and let everything repeat itself. She had to face whatever was waiting for her, no matter the cost. The sun had risen high, its light filtering through the curtains of Sarah's apartment, but she still could not sleep. Last night, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange events she had just experienced. The frightening messages, the black car, and the feeling of always being watched had turned her life upside down. But now, she felt something different in her heart, dash a sense of calm, even though everything was still unclear. She looked at the old phone on the table, recalling the last time she received that strange call, the mysterious and threatening voice. She had been very worried, but now she was determined not to let fear control her. She would face the truth, no matter how scary it might be. Sarah decided to call Luke. He was the only person she could trust right now. He had always been an honest friend, always ready to help her in any situation. She hoped he could help her get through this. After a few rings, Luke answered. "Sarah, how are you?" His voice was warm, but filled with concern. "Luke, I need your help. Everything's not over. I cannot do this alone anymore." On the other end of the line, Luke was silent for a moment, then he gently replied, "I understand. We will handle this together, but you have to trust me. I will help you. You don't have to face this alone." A wave of relief washed over Sarah. She had found the support she needed, and now things might finally get resolved. She knew that she would not have to live in fear anymore. Soon after, Luke came to meet her. He drove to pick her up and took her to a safe place, a house on the outskirts of the city, where they could lay low and make a plan. During the drive, Sarah felt lighter. She felt safe with Luke by her side, and her worries began to fade. At the house, Luke had found important documents, evidence confirming that the people behind everything were not just some underground criminal organization, as she had thought. In fact, they were a group of extremely powerful individuals who had been exposed due to their illegal actions. They had targeted Sarah because she had unknowingly discovered things they did not want to be revealed. But Luke had found a way to break their network. With the help of a few old friends in security and investigation, they had monitored and gathered enough evidence to bring these people to light. Step by step, Sarah's and Luke's team had dismantled the network. They had alerted the police, and in the end, these dangerous individuals were arrested and forced to face justice. In the following days, Sarah felt like she was living in a dream. She had regained her peace and was living a normal life without fear. Everything she had faced had become the past. She returned to her beloved job, living a life of freedom without worrying about things beyond her control. Luke was always by her side, like a trustworthy friend. Together, they had overcome the challenges, and now they shared happy moments, peaceful evenings together. One day, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself. She no longer saw a woman in panic and fear, but a strong and confident person. She realized that her journey was not just about escaping danger, but about rediscovering herself, learning to face her fears, and overcoming them. She smiled at herself in the mirror. The dark nights were over, and now a new light was shining. She had passed the trial, not just with the help of a good friend like Luke, but also with her own determination. She was no longer afraid, and that was a new beginning, the beginning of a new free and peaceful life. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the best stories. See you in the next one.